Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Global Compliance Panel's live webinar on pre-market approval agreement with FDA for the medical device companies. My name is Michael, and I'll be your host for today's session. And on behalf of the Global Compliance Panel team, I'd like to thank you all for being part of today's session. Today's webinar is being presented by our speaker, Mr. Thomas E. Colonna. A few words about Dr. Colonna before we start off today's session. He's earned a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology from the University of Sciences in Philadelphia, and also a PhD in Molecular Biology from the Johns Hopkins University, and also a law degree from the Georgetown University Law Center. And in addition, Dr. Colonna also holds academic appointments at Johns Hopkins University and the University of Sciences in Philadelphia. And Dr. Colonna also provides consulting services in the scientific and regulatory aspects of a wide range of medical devices and biologics, with particular expertise in the areas of vitro diagnostics, ELISA-based, PCR-based, SNPs, microarrays, and pharmacogenomics, and medical device software, and also biotechnology-based products. And Dr. Colonna's consulting clients range from Fortune 500 companies to small startup companies located throughout the U.S. as well as Canada, India, and also Russia. Widely published in numerous fields, Dr. Colonna brings a unique multidisciplinary approach to problem solving, and we are honored to have him today with us to present today's webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start off today's session, I just want to quickly outline today's program. This webinar is for a 60-minute duration. First, our speaker, Ms. Colonna, will go through the webinar, highlighting the areas that he would cover, and then share with you his presentation. And also would like to inform all our participants present today that once part of today's teleconference, you would be on mute till the end of the session. You have a couple of minutes at the end for your question and answers. But if you do have any questions during the session, ladies and gentlemen, please post them in the Q&A panel or the chat column, and we can get to them once we are done with the presentation. And also, for any reason, if you do get logged out of today's session, please follow the same procedure to join in again. And now that we're all ready, I request Dr. Colonna take it from you.
Thanks, Michael. Can everybody hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. All right. Let's start with a quick overview of what pre-market approval is, or what it's for. Class 3 medical devices, those not substantially equivalent to pre-amendment Class 1 or Class 2 devices, are subject to pre-market approval. In addition, devices for which general controls alone and special controls are not sufficient to establish safety and efficacy, and devices that are used in supporting or sustaining human life, or are for use which is of substantial importance in preventing impairment of human health, or presents a potential unreasonable risk of illness or injury. Class 3 devices must meet general controls and must be approved by FDA prior to marketing. Class 2 devices can go through the pre-market notification process, so 510K. Generally, the Center for Devices and Radiological Health sees many more 510Ks, typically 3,000 to 4,000 per year, versus PMAs for Class 3, which usually it's only a couple of dozen. How do they differ? Well, one, volume of information. 510Ks can be a dozen. On the short end, a dozen pages or dozens of pages. PMAs, thousands of pages, sometimes tens of thousands of pages. Clinical study requirements, follow-up and analysis. PMAs are almost always required to have a clinical study. Some 510K products have clinical studies, but many do not. Bioresearch monitoring inspections, extensive labeling review, manufacturing information, panel review. You don't have panel reviews for 510Ks. You have panel reviews for PMAs. Time to approval. By statute, the 510Ks have a 90-day review time. the PMA's 180 days. However, there's a difference between calendar time that we all experience every day and FDA time. FDA's clock runs a little differently. They just count review time. So when they send you a letter asking for more information or want an additional study done, the clock stops. And until you reply, the clock doesn't start again. So 180 days, 190 days is not 90 days of calendar time, not 180 days of calendar time. It can be many months for 510K of actual calendar time. And it can be years for a PMA in actual calendar time. Here's a little table comparing and contrasting PMAs and 510Ks. PMAs, the standard is safety and efficacy. For 510K, the standard is substantial equivalent. A lot more scientific evidence in a PMA because you need to scientifically demonstrate that you're safe and effective for your intended use. Meanwhile, for a 510K, you're providing information comparing to a predicate device, saying that I'm substantially equivalent to a device as opposed to demonstrating safety and efficacy. Again, PMA is almost always accompanied by clinical data, possibly clinical data for a 510K. Longer application, shorter application. User fees are far different. You're talking about a standard user fee for a PMA of $258,520 for this fiscal year. Meanwhile, for a 510K, just $5,170. Small business user fees. So small businesses get a discount, get less than $30 million in gross revenues. You can be classified as a small business. Still, big difference. $64,630 for PMA, $2,585 for a 510K. A couple more differences. The PMA is approved prior to marketing. So drugs are approved, biologics are approved, Class 3 medical devices are approved. Class 2 medical devices that go through 510Ks are cleared, not approved. Both pending applications are confidential. There is a release of some information after approval. So for PMA, a summary information is released. Again, for 510K, there's also a summary available 30 days after clearance. The last line here about exclusivity, what I'm referring to here is when you have your 510K cleared, immediately somebody else, another competitor, can come in and use your 510K as a predicate for their 510K application if they need to, so literally the day after. Meanwhile, with a PMA, when your PMA is approved, a competitor can't come in the next day and say, well, I'm substantially equivalent to your PMA because it's Class 3 versus Class 2. So you have some exclusivity. Whoever comes in next has to go through everything that you went through for your PMA. To determine safety and efficacy, FDA considers persons for who the use of the device is represented or intended, adequate directions for use, probable benefit from the health from use weighed against any probable illness or injury or illness from such use, so risk-benefit analysis, the reliability of the device, valid scientific evidence, clinically significant results for a significant portion of the target population, and clinical data that supports the intended use. I overshot there. Okay, there are early collaborative meetings, and there's a guidance for that that set forth a framework and procedures for two types of early collaboration meetings. There's determination meetings and agreement meetings. So determination meetings are intended to address the following issues. The type of control that will be required, which is not always very straightforward for a Class 3 medical device. Placebos are not always readily available. If you're going to have an implanted device, and most implanted devices are Class 3 devices, you can't just implant a sham. Basically, you're going to need to compare it against some standard of care, some other surgical intervention. So you're going to have a little bit of an apples and oranges when it comes to controls. Whether or not the study must be randomized, what evidence other than controlled clinical trials may be acceptable to support the PMA application. An emphasis on what data is required to demonstrate effectiveness. So again, it's a challenge when you're comparing to controls where you have a little bit of an apples and oranges without a nice, straightforward placebo like you often see with drugs and biologics. A determination meeting is also to be referred to as a pre-PMA meeting. The goal of these meetings is to reach a prospective agreement prior to initiation of the clinical investigation regarding the type of study design and data that will be necessary for PMA approval. The product of the meeting is a written binding agreement between FDA and the applicant regarding the nature and scope of the clinical investigation. So you're essentially sitting down with reviewers, statisticians and such, to basically contract with them, develop a contract on whether they think or agree that would be necessary to demonstrate safety and efficacy for your product. And you agreeing to do that, and whether or not you're successful in terms of actually getting the data, achieving the goals to demonstrate effectiveness, well, that's not contractual. That's up to the science to go ahead and get your data to meet those criteria. The sponsor should submit the following information: detailed description of the device, statement of intended use and indications for use of the device, the proposed plan for measuring the effectiveness of the device, identification of the control group, estimated sample size and number of study sites, an analysis of the risks associated with the use of the device, any available performance testing, animal testing, or prior clinical research. The agreement meeting is intended to be conducted prior to submission of an IDE, investigational device exemption, rather than at the pre-PMA application stage. Available manufacturers of all Class 3 products or implants for which an IDE investigation will be conducted. The sponsor should submit a detailed clinical protocol that includes the following: inclusion-exclusion criteria, specific items to be monitored in the study and the schedule for monitoring, description of the data safety monitoring board operation, description of the statistical analysis plan, informed consent materials, IRB information, list of other study information. Now, for determination and agreement meetings, by requiring a written agreement between FDA and the sponsors, this was developed under the Food and Drug Administration Modernization Act of 1997. Ensures that changes in FDA policy or turnover in FDA personnel will not lead to changing clinical requirements. So back in the 80s and 90s, this was an issue where you'd kind of reach a handshake agreement with a group of reviewers at FDA. Again, this can sometimes take years. Of course, the clinical trials can take years. And by the time you're actually submitting the clinical trial data, which you now believe demonstrated safety and efficacy, those people that you had the handshake agreement with can be gone. They've retired, they went on to industry, they've left, they're not there anymore. And you're dealing with new people who say, well, you didn't have a handshake agreement with me. I wasn't here X number of years ago when you reached the agreement. So now with a written contract, essentially a binding agreement, it ensures that these sorts of turnovers don't create problems. The only circumstances in which the terms of the agreement meeting determination may be changed are in the event that upholding the agreement would be contrary to public health or pursuant to a written agreement between the agency and the applicant. So, there can be modifications, but like a typical contract, most sides have to agree. Now, FDA does hold the trump card that if there is some sort of determination that it will be contrary to public health, they can terminate unilaterally. For agreements reached at the pre-IDE phase, the only circumstances in which the determination agreement may be changed are when there is a substantial scientific issue that is deemed essential to determining the safety or effectiveness of the device, pursuant to a written agreement between FDA and the applicant. If the sponsor changes the device or the investigational plan, the agreement may no longer be binding. So, you always need to be careful, and if you're making any changes, to run them by your reviewers prior to implementing the changes. Determination and agreement meetings provide the sponsor an opportunity to address topics such as feasibility studies, preclinical testing, safety testing, submission format issues. There are day 100 meetings, a general discussion of identified issues and discussion of remedial actions, a discussion of an action plan with estimated dates of completion, a discussion of FDA estimated timetable for completion, identification of the need for panel involvement, a discussion of possible pre-market versus post-market requirements. So this is an area where you might wind up, as a condition of approval, being required to do what's typically referred to as a phase 4 clinical study, so a post-approval clinical study. Pre-approval inspections, usually required before issuance of an approval order, generally limited to device subject to a PMA. Prepare as for routine cGMP inspection. Modular review of PMA, Section 209 of the Medical Device User Fee, Medical Act, amended Section 515C of the Act of the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act to create a modular review program for PMAs. New Section 738A1C provides that applicants submitting portions of the applications under this new program must pay the full fee upon submission of the first portion of such an application. So you can have CDRH reviewing your PMA piecemeal. So you may not have to, you don't have to wait until the clinical trial is done, until you have all your data, you've written the complete PMA application, and then submit it for review. It is possible to submit parts, modules, so that the agency can review and sign off on pieces. So, by the time you submit the last piece, you may be 7/8 of the way through your review. Of course, the fee, 100% of the fee has to be paid up front. PMA amendments, information generally submitted during review of the original PMA or PMA supplement prior to approval. Review period may be extended up to 180 days. The major amendment containing significant or new or updated data, detailed and new analysis, or information previously omitted is submitted. So you can also amend your PMA, the original PMA, while it's under review. You can also amend supplements, and we'll talk about supplements. So you can have your PMA approved, and then you make some changes. You can file PMA supplements to essentially amend. Technically, the PMA amendment only occurs prior to approval of the PMA, while the original is under review. once the original has been approved. Any sort of changes like that are called supplements. So for example, new indications for use of the device, labeling changes, different manufacturing or sterilization facility, changes in manufacturing methods of quality control procedures, changes in sterilization procedures, changes in packaging, changes in design or performance specifications, components, principle of operation, or physical layout, extensions to expiration date. 180-day PMA supplements, there are a few different kinds. We'll kind of go through them. 180-day ones are required before making a change affecting the safety or efficacy of the device, subject to an approved PMA. There are fees for these PMA supplements. The standard fee is currently $38,778. Small biz fee, $9,695. There are also panel tracks, so if they need to have a panel review of your PMA supplement, the user fee is substantially higher, $193,890, and the small biz fee, $48,473. There are also what are known as real-time PMA supplements. A real-time PMA supplement is defined as a supplement to an approved pre-market application or a pre-market report under Section 515 that requests a minor change to the device, such as a minor change in the device software, because of design, to the software, sterilization, labeling, for which the applicant, the PMA holder, has requested and the agency has granted a meeting or similar forum to jointly review and determine the status of the supplement. There are fees for the real-time supplement. Standard fee is $18,096 currently. The small business fee is $4,524. Real-time PMA supplement is appropriate for minor changes that can be expected within a product line, which include changes to the device design, software, instructions for use, warnings or precautions or other labeling that does not affect indications or contraindications. Basically, whenever you narrow the scope of your contraindications or warnings or so forth, as long as you're within the original approved labeling. Sterilization and packaging methods. Minor change should be one that's expected for that device type, validated according to scientific principles we have relied on in previous reviews, and accepted test methods for procedures for devices of that type wherever applicable, such as an FDA-recognized standard or guidance document, adequately supported by preclinical or animal testing with no new clinical data, typically involving review within a single scientific discipline rather than a multidisciplinary review. What should the real-time supplement contain? Identify all modifications planned for the device and labeling, include testing and results, along with a detailed risk analysis to support the continued safety and effectiveness of the modified device. Risk analysis should include a thorough assessment of all potential hazards associated with device use, taking into account the incremental modification proposed in your submission and the cumulative effects of any preceding modifications made since the approval of the original PMA. Risk analysis should also identify the steps you have taken to minimize any additional risks that may be created by incremental or cumulative modification. The format for the real-time review meetings, you present changes to your device, results of testing to support these changes, and your risk analysis. You and FDA discuss any questions or comments about the changes, testing, or risk analysis. Meeting briefly adjourns to allow discussion amongst the FDA staff. FDA generally gives you verbal feedback the very same day. And after the meeting, FDA will typically send a decision letter, approvable, or not approvable letter by fax with a hard copy to follow. Approvable means there's going to be some conditions. Approvable given the following conditions, not approvable, obviously not approvable, and approvable, or approval is approval. There are 30-day notice PMA supplements, changes which affect the safety or effectiveness of the device. It may qualify as a 30-day notice, or changes to the manufacturing procedure, or changes in method of manufacture. When these changes, however, also alter performance or design specifications, or the designated physical or chemical specifications of the physical or the finished device, a 30-day notice is not appropriate. In these cases, PMA holders should submit a 180-day PMA supplement or a real-time review PMA supplement as appropriate. Generally, a 30-day notice may be appropriate for changes in sterility dose auditing, duration time used at sterilization site, a manual cutting process to an automated cutting process, manually controlled machining to manufacturing processes that use computer numeric control machining, manual sewing to automation of the sewing process, an existing manual soldering process to adding an alternate automated soldering process for joining the high voltage capacitor wires to a high voltage printed circuit board assembly connector pad. Other examples, the resistance weld that bonds the feed-through wire to an implantable pulse generator connector wire to add a spot laser weld. A manufacturing process change from a resistance weld to a laser weld. Bonding equipment to replace existing equipment with a different model heat bonder. Note a validated change that replaces the equipment with identical equipment that uses the same parameters as originally validated would not require a 30-day notice. Other examples, change the wash procedure for the printed circuit board assembly sequence to increase the efficiency of the process and reduce costs. So this wouldn't affect safety or efficacy of the product. It's just a change in manufacturing to make your manufacturing process more efficient and therefore less costly. Replace the current manual cleaning process from removing residual manufacturing materials from equipment with a semi-automatic substrate washer. Machining lubricants, the flux used for solder rework. In addition, other potential 30-day notice changes, a change that adds a new clean room to an existing manufacturing space, change from an ISO Class 4 environment to an ISO Class 5 environment, a relocation of a formulation room within a manufacturing facility, using an additional supplier for laser welding of components, adding a raw material supplier, adding an alternate supplier for the UV chromophore for an intraocular lens, making a change in sterilization test site or sterilization test sample. What would the 30-day notice contain? A description of the change, any illustrative pictures should also be included, a summary of the data or information supporting the change, example, a few concise pages summarizing the key results, and a statement that the change has been made under the requirements of Section 520F of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and 21 CFR Part 820. Suppliers of components, materials, or services where specifications are unchanged. These changes should be submitted as 30-day notices only when the material was critical to the performance of the device as determined by the manufacturer. If the material is not critical to the performance of the device, then any change should be submitted as part of the periodic report, often referred to as the annual report. Note, however, that if a manufacturing change involves adding a second supplier of a critical component and the specifications of that component are different, a 30-day notice is not appropriate because the specifications have changed. The PMA holder then should submit a 180-day PMA supplement or a real-time review PMA supplement as appropriate. Quality control testing. Generally, a 30-day notice may be appropriate for changes to quality control testing used on incoming components, raw materials, the in-process device, or the finished device. For example, performing end product pyrogen testing on non-sterile samples prior to sterilization, eliminating certain in-process or final device tests to eliminate test redundancy, waste, or use test samples selected during the processing more efficiently, changing sample size in a bacterial endotoxin test assay, removing a rejection criterion for component acceptance in an in-process inspection step, adding inspection steps in direct response to field failures of the device. Type of manufacturing processes, changing the type of process used. Example, a change from machining a particular part to injection molding the part may be appropriate for submission as a 30-day notice. Changes that qualify for a special PMA supplement changes being affected under 21 CFR 814.39B2 for changes in quality controls or manufacturing process that add a new specification or test method or otherwise provide additional assurance of purity, identity, strength, or reliability of the device can be submitted either as a special PMA supplement changes being affected or a 30-day notice. The manufacturing changes that may be reviewed as a special PMA supplement are generally those that add a step to the quality control or manufacturing process to enhance safety but do not impact effectiveness. If efficacy is also affected, those changes should be submitted as a 30-day notice. Here's some examples of changes that do not qualify for submission of a 30-day notice. Any change in manufacturing needed to accommodate a change in manufacturing sterilization site of a finished device, device design or performance specifications, material specifications, or device operating software. FDA recommends that submissions for these changes be in the form of a 180-day PMA supplement or an alternative submission, for example, a real-time supplement as appropriate. Changes to the manufacturing procedure or method of manufacturing that do not affect the safety or effectiveness of the device must be submitted in the periodic report, referred to as the annual report. The contents of the 30-day notice, a description of the device, identification of the manufacturing facilities where the change will be implemented, reason for the change, including a description of any adverse events or field failures that have occurred, appendices of supporting data where appropriate, the summary of the data or information supporting the change should include a summary of the procedures established for the identification, documentation, validation, review, and approval of the manufacturing changes submitted in the 30-day notice. The statistical rationale for the sampling method, if you plan to verify the change processes by routine sampling and independent measurement. A description of how you will monitor and control any manufacturing process you intend to change. A summary of the completed validation study that demonstrates that the manufacturing change can be made without significantly changing the operation of the final device. This summary should include a description of the acceptance criteria, information on how using valid statistical methods to analyze test data, information that describes the statistical rationale for sample sizes, a list of any deviations that occurred, and a determination of the impact of the deviation on the results, an explanation of how change control procedures were implemented, including whether you modified the manufacturing or quality control instructions or the manufacturing specification. In addition, you should include a summary of how purchasing control procedures were implemented to evaluate any new supplier or contractor if the manufacturing change involves changes in suppliers of components or raw materials that are critical to the performance of the device, or the use of a new contractor for a manufacturing process or quality control testing. You should also describe the type and extent of control to be exercised over the component or raw material, including specifications for the incoming material and a description of incoming acceptance activity. Additionally, you should describe any testing that was completed to evaluate the use of the component or material and include a summary of the data. Note that if the contract manufacturer is manufacturing a finished device as defined in 21 CFR 820.3I, then a 30-day notice is not appropriate, and the change should be submitted as a manufacturing site change supplement. Use of data relating to pre-market approval. Any information contained in the PMA application, including the information from clinical and preclinical tests or studies that demonstrate the safety and effectiveness of a device, but excluding descriptions of methods of manufacture and product composition, other trade secrets, is available 6 years after the PMA has been approved for use by FDA in approving another device, determining whether a product development protocol has been completed for another device, establishing a performance standard or special control, classifying or reclassifying another product, another medical device. So it's just internally used by FDA as reference, but they're blinded for the first 6 years after approval. There are some fee exemptions and waivers. So a PMA supplement for a manufacturing site change, there's no fee. Special PMA supplement, there's no fee. Any application for a device intended solely for pediatric use is exempt from a user fee. If an applicant obtains an exemption under this provision and later submits a supplement for an adult use, the submission is subject to a fee in effect for an original pre-market application. Any application from a state or federal government entity is exempt from any fee unless the device is to be distributed commercially. The very first pre-market approval submission, PMA, Product Development Protocol, PDP, Biologic License Application, pre-market report, from a small business with gross receipts or sales less than $30 million, is a one-time waiver of the fee that would otherwise apply. Any questions?
Thank you, Tom. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions for Tom, you could go ahead. What you can do, ladies and gentlemen, is if you directly want to put forward any questions for Tom, you could click on the raise hand option, which is a palm-like icon on your participant screen. That way I can go ahead and unmute your individual lines, and you can directly put forward your questions for Tom. Or you could post your questions in the Q&A panel or the chat messenger. So if you have any questions for Tom, ladies and gentlemen, on today's topic, please do go ahead. And also at the same time, just want to remind you all as well that if you do come up with questions at any time after today's session as well, you can send in your questions directly over to us, and we'll make sure that these questions are forwarded to our speaker to get you your answers. Tom, I have a question for you from one of our attendees here. I'll just go ahead and post that on your chat column. Yeah, just go ahead and post the question on your chat column.
Okay, the question is, what is the advantage of a modular PMA submission? Well, the number one advantage is the fact that you're not doing everything. You have completed everything, completely drafted the PMA, and then submit it, and then sit back and wait for FDA to evaluate it and come back with any comments or issues or questions. And wait, crossing your fingers, hoping that your PMA is approved. When you go through the modular process, you're submitting pieces of the PMA. It's basically the finished PMA, but they're just pieces of it, not the whole PMA. So you can get feedback and essentially get approval. There's no more questions. There's nothing that has to be followed up for approval of that module. That's kind of in the bank for you. And then you go to the next one and the next one and so forth. So it could be, in some cases, when you're submitting your final module, you may have half, 3/4, 7/8 of your application, already approved, kind of in the bank. So you know, all right, the only thing that they're going to come back with, any questions, comments, requiring additional studies and so forth, is just for that last module. So you have a lot more, I don't want to say certainty, but you have a little bit more comfort in seeing the light at the end of the tunnel and having an idea to go back to your investors and such, that you are in fact close to the finish line and can expect that your product will be on the market in a relatively short order. Otherwise, if you wait and submit the finished application without going through the modular process, who knows? They could come back with comments asking for additional studies on any part of your PMA application. You don't have anything banked, so to speak, like you would in a modular PMA review. Of course, the downside is you got to put up the money sooner. But I mean, you have to put up the money sooner or later. Any other questions?
Thank you, Tom. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any further questions for Tom, please do go ahead. We have a few more minutes, so if you want to directly put forward any questions whatsoever on today's topic or any suggestions as well, you can go ahead with those. So if you have any questions for Tom, please do go ahead. And while we wait for any questions, I just want to remind you all as well that today's webinar is available in a recorded format. So if you feel that any of your friends or colleagues or anybody else in your organization could benefit from today's session, you can have them log on to our website at GlobalCompliancePanel.com, or you can also give us a call and make a purchase as well. And once again, just want to reiterate, if you have any questions whatsoever, even after today's session, you can send in the questions over directly to us, and we'll make sure these are forwarded to our speaker to get you your answers. But Tom, I have another question here. I'll just post it on your chat messenger, which I've just done.
What about software validation for Class 3 devices? Are they considered a major concern level by guidance of 2005? It is a major level of concern because it is a Class 3 product. So the software is going to be of a major level of concern. It's a component of a Class 3 device. And when you make changes to the software, you know, again, with the PMA supplements and so forth, whether it's a 30-day or it's 180-day or it's the real time, as we went through it, that's going to depend upon what changes you would make to the software and what impact those changes could have on the safety and efficacy of the product.
Thank you so much, Tom. Ladies and gentlemen, any final questions? If you have them, you can go ahead. And also just wanted to inform you all that the feedback form for today's session is open in the polling area. So before you log off today, please share your feedback in today's session. Again, the reason we emphasize on the feedback is it would help us in making our webinars better as we move along. And this applies not just to the Global Compliance Panel, but to our speaker, Dr. Colonna as well. So please share your feedback before you log off today's session. And if you have any final questions, ladies and gentlemen, please go ahead. Tom, I'll just give it final 30 seconds to see if our attendees do have any questions for you.
Okay. sorry. So we have no questions? No more questions?
I don't see any questions coming up, Tom, so we'll go ahead and conclude the session. Before we do any final thoughts, Tom.
Okay. Wish you all luck. You are obviously interested in the PMA process because you're probably involved in the Class 3 medical device. They are a challenge because they are complex devices, and they are a challenge in the review by FDA because FDA doesn't review many of these. CDRH doesn't review a lot of PMAs. So not everybody at CDRH, all the reviewers, have experience with PMAs. They're all very accustomed to 510Ks. This is basically a 510K mill, but there's literally only a couple of dozen PMAs a year. So it can be a challenge where you often have reviewers that don't have a lot of experience with these very complex medical devices.
Thank you, Tom. And ladies and gentlemen, once again, just want to reiterate, if you have any questions whatsoever after today's session, you can please send them over to us, and we'll make sure these are forwarded to our speaker. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all for participating in today's session. And on behalf of our speaker, Mr. Thomas E. Colonna, and the entire Global Compliance Panel team, I'd like to thank you all once again and hope the rest of the day is a lovely one. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks, everyone.